Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Mays and I'm very excited for all of you who have signed up for this challenge. What we'll be doing in this challenge is we are going to be completing two separate quilt blocks, and they're going to be put into two different quilts, which we will be donating to charity once this is done. And what this video is for is so that if you run into any problems, any questions while putting together your quilt blocks, you can reference this video, and I am going to be showing step by step how to complete each of these blocks. And the first block that we're going to work on is this one. It is a star pattern, and each of you will have a packet of fabric, and you will most likely not have the same color. We're going to have purples and blues and reds, so this one is kind of the orange yellow tone that we have in the packets also. Now, so what I'm going to talk to you about is maintaining the 1/4 inch seam while you are sewing. Most of you should on your machine have a little line that shows where a 1/4 inch would put you. If it does not, or if you are forgetful, or if it's tough to see, what I recommend doing is taking some masking tape and marking that guide. So I'm going to mark my guide so that, there we go. Make sure you don't put it over any of these feed dogs in here. This is what pushes the fabric through the machine. You don't want to tape over that just in the beginning. And what we'll do is I'll show you how this works. You're going to take your squared pieces and you're just going to line it up right next to that marker. And you'll put in your seam. And as you're sewing, it's nice to have a guide to show exactly where the edge of your fabric needs to run along. And once you've put that in, it is a good test to take a ruler, measure out 1/4 inch, lower your needle, put it right up against your needle, and it lines up to my marker. So that means that I have an accurate 1/4 inch. And then also you can check on your fabric. I have my seam that I've put in, and you measure it up, and it is each of you should have gotten a packet that looks like this, and in it there will be patterns to make these two blocks. And we're going to start with our star block. So if you go into your packet, you should find the instructions and all the material that you need in order to complete that block. Okay. And also in your packet you should have a list of supplies that you need, and I'm going to show you a couple things. Of course you need a ruler. You don't need anything fancy. You can use any old school ruler. A good pair of sharp scissors for the fabric. You don't need this, but it is nice to have a seam ripper. Just in case you make a mistake, you can gently take the stitches out. I'll show it to you later how you use it. And then also you'll need a pencil or a pen to mark your fabric. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out on your pattern. It'll tell you that you need to cut all the squares. So all of your squares in your packet, and each of you have a different color. Right now I'm going to show you the black and white. You're going to cut all of the 3 7/8 squares in half once, so diagonally. So what we'll do, and on this dark fabric, since it's so dark, what we do is we turn it over to the lighter side, the wrong side of the fabric, so we can draw our line. What you'll do is you'll make a diagonal line to each of the corners. And you're going to draw that on each of your squares, and then once you do that, we're going to cut those in half. So mark up all your squares, and then you'll also have one large square, and it measures, let's see, 7 1/4 inches. And what you're going to do is you're going to be cutting this in half diagonally twice. So what you'll do is mark it once, and whoops, twice. So now you can see I've cut out my squares. All your small ones will turn out to be in these 2 triangles cut in half once diagonally, and then the large square is cut in half twice diagonally to give you 4 triangles. So now I'll show you the next. Now what I've done is I've taken my large light print triangle and I'm taking some of my dark print, and what we're going to do is we're going to be sewing 2 triangles to this triangle, and we're going to do the short sides of the triangle are the edges that it's going to be sewn towards. And what you'll do is you're going to flip this over, and you're going to want to line up these 2 corners together. Don't worry about how this end is going to hang off, but we will line up this end together, and then we are going to put a seam down that. And once we do that, I'm going to show you how we'll press this back over with our iron, and then we'll sew on the next triangle. We want to keep this nice and okay, so I've got these 2 corners lined up. I'm going to lower my presser foot and make sure you hold on to the ends of your string so that it doesn't get sucked down into the bottom of your machine. And you're going to slowly put in your stitch. I can't stress this enough. It is very important after everything you do to press your seams down. Now you're going to, usually I tell you in the pattern which direction your seam is going to point towards, and usually it's the darker print. So we're going to have it going underneath the darker side. So we'll press that down. That's perfect. And then also I tell you on the pattern that you need to trim off these edges. We call these dog ears. So what we'll do is just after each time you press, just trim off these little edges because you don't need those and they get in the way. So now what we'll do is we're going to sew on this other piece, and again we're going to line it up and line up these 2 corners together. Those are the important ones. So we'll do that. See that I've sewn on this piece, and I've pressed it again towards the darker side of the print, and I've got these little dog ears, so I'm just going to trim those off. And you have your first block. And what you'll do is you'll make 4. We have 4 of these blocks made, so we'll put those over to the side now. And we are going to be stitching together the light triangle with our medium triangle. And you are going to make 4 blocks. And so we'll put those together, and we're going to put the right sides on top of each other. Line up the corners. And you're going to put your seam in right there, and then we'll press it open and trim off the dot. I've sewn my 4 squares together, so we're going to once again press these open, and we're going to press the seam towards the medium color because it's always going to be the darker of the 2. So we have that pressed open, and we're going to trim off these dog ears. And we've got our block made, so there'll be 4 of those once again, and they should measure. You can double check these, and this one should measure to be about 3.5 inches. Yep, by 3.5. So it's nice to double check your work as you're going, just to make sure that you're doing things accurately. So now you should only have 4 of the medium triangles left and 4 of the medium dark. And so we'll do the same thing as we just did with the light and the medium, and we're going to take them, clean this up. We're going to take the 2 triangles and we're going to sew them together to make another square that measures 3.5 by 3.5, and you'll take them once again, put the 2 right sides together, lining up the edges, and we're going to put our seam in and then press it open, and then we'll trim off. It is very important that when you are sewing triangles that you do not tug on the fabric. You need to feed it in because the fabric is cut on the bias, it stretches very easily. So you need to make sure you don't stretch it because it'll give some unevenness in the way that your quilt block will lay. So you need to make sure that you're not tugging on it tight. You need to just feed it in to your machine. And you'll get a nice flat block. Okay, now once again we are going to be pressing our seam towards the darker of the fabric. And then trim off the dog ears. Okay, now that we've gotten all our triangles sewn together into squares and rectangles, we're going to start assembling our block. We're going to start with this center square. It's called a pinwheel. So what we'll do is you can follow the pattern on on the instructions that I gave you. It should show you exactly how you need to line up. I have these lined up, and they're going to be in two separate rows, the top row and the bottom row. And one thing that you'll notice is when you put the right sides on top of each other, the seams will be opposite from each other. You can see that one seam is being pressed one way and one is the opposite direction. And the lines on the seams should line up perfectly. So it's kind of a guide to line those up, and then you'll put your two rows sewn together. What we're going to do is we're going to press the seams in certain directions. On your pattern it should show a little line pointing in the direction your seam needs to be pressed. So the top row we're going to be pressing to the right. We'll press, and then this bottom row we're going to have the seam press to the left. They need to be opposite from one another so that we can line up the corners. So once again, if you line it up, make sure you double check to make sure that they match your pattern for where the triangles, the directions they need to be. And we'll take this, put the right sides together, and once again, having the seams going in different directions really helps you, because it lines things up. If you can open it up and see that this one's going that way and the other way, the lines line up, and make sure that you keep straight lines when you're sewing this together, so you can hold on to that and it'll line up perfectly. So now what you're going to want to do is, on the instructions I have here, I have a little arrow with arrows going both directions. So what that means is you're going to be pressing this seam in the center of the square open, which means you're going to take these two seams and open it up and press it so they won't go just one direction. You can see me opening this up very carefully. All right. And that'll help your block to lay flat. So you can see. Give it one more press. And that is your pinwheel center of your block. It's so easy. To take two of our rectangle blocks and we're going to sew two squares to each of the sides, and the lighter print is going to be sewn next to the dark print. So we'll take those, put the right sides together, and once again our seams are going to be pressed in opposite directions, so they will create a little guide of where to line it up. And we'll put in our seams and press them open. Now we have our rectangular blocks sewn to our squares, and we are going to be pressing the seams towards the outside instead of the center. So that direction, and then also the seam is going to be pressing towards the outside as well. And you'll repeat that on both blocks, so then If you turn it over, you can see they point towards the outer edges. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to sew the remaining 2 rectangular blocks to our center pinwheel. And you want these triangles to be, the dark triangles to be touching the block. So what we'll do is we line those up, and you want this center corner right here to line up with this line. And we'll fold it over and sew those 2 together on both sides. And then once we're done, we're going to be pressing our seams towards the center of the block so that it's opposite from the other 2 rows. Once again, I've put in my seams, and you are going to be sewing the seam towards the pinwheel, so towards the center. So line that up. Get it ready for your iron. Press towards the center, and then this block will also be, this side of the block will also be pressed towards the center. Okay, now that you've gotten those 2 put on, we're going to do our final step and add these remaining rows. So if you line them up on each side, back that up, you can see what it's going to look like. It's going to be great. So just line those up, and once again, you're going to want to make sure that your corners line up with this line and on those edges. And it's so wonderful to be ironing because you have those seams that just match up to one another to make sure that you have those accurate lines. So I'll put in this seam and we'll press it. And I told you to press these final seams open, but you can press them open like you did the center seam, or you can press it in either direction you desire. Right now I'm just going to press them out. Either way, just make sure that it lays flat, that your block doesn't stick out in weird areas from being too bulky. Now this is the final product that you've been working on. If you can see, all my lines match up very nice on all the corners. They all match up, and just to let you know, it is not that important to me if your lines are perfect like this. Just do your best. If you iron and measure as you go, you should be able to get this very close. I'm sure all of you will do just great. So now that we've completed this block, I'm going to go on to the next block and show you how to do the railroad.